So first of all, thank you everyone for taking some time out of your afternoon to join us to hear about financial industry trends, in particular, how to leverage total experience within your organization. This webinar is put together by both Liferay and Ubiquity, so we both welcome you here today. My name is Paul Towers. I'm the country manager for Liferay Australia New Zealand, and joining me today is Rob Van Duyn, head of user experience for one of our partners, Ubiquity. Just a few brief housekeeping measures. If during the course of the presentation you have any questions, please use the Q&A functionality down the bottom of the Zoom window to put in your questions. We'll probably take those at the end of the session unless there's anything pressing that comes up as we're talking through the slides today. So in terms of the agenda, the real focus today is to help you understand how your organization can leverage total experience to drive outcomes for both customers and employees. I think one of the most interesting things that has emerged over the last few years is that experience is now seen as the most valuable differentiator within many organizations. Traditionally, it's been things like product and pricing, but now more than ever, consumers are choosing to stay with brands or move to new brands that offer them a personalized and highly relevant experience, whether that's on a mobile device, web application, or other channels that they interact with that brand and business with. So during today's webinar, we're going to be covering quite a lot, as you can see from the agenda. So we'll be looking at a little bit of a review of the financial industry landscape. We will provide a definition of total experience. We'll look at some of the obstacles that come up for organizations thinking in the total experience mindset. And then we'll dive into how that experience comes together, connecting people, connecting customers, connecting employees. We'll speak also about the benefits of a total experience approach and also provide a little bit of insight in terms of how Liferay helps organizations achieve these kind of outcomes towards the end of the session. So we'll jump straight in and look at what we're kind of seeing within the financial industry landscape. And I think, you know, the kind of starting premise of all of this in the conversation today is that customers expect modern and immersive experiences. It's kind of like a situation where a rising tide lifts all boats, or at least lifts expectations, because consumers, whether it's in their personal lives or their professional lives, are now used to interacting with products and services that give them personalized experiences, instant gratification, and are easy to interact with. You know, if you just think about some of the tools that we use in our everyday lives, whether it's Uber Eats, ordering meals, or watching, you know, the latest TV shows on Netflix, all of these experiences understand that we as individuals have unique tastes and preferences and also interact with these products and services in different ways. So because of that, digital transformation has emerged and continues to emerge as a key priority for financial service institutions. And I'm sure that's not news to anyone on the call, but within that, the top two reasons that organizations are looking to pursue these initiatives, according to Gartner, is around enhancing the customer experience and almost equally actually improving employee productivity. What's interesting though, when you talk about total experience, is that traditionally these two kinds of forms of digital transformation have been viewed as siloed initiatives, different initiatives often undertaken by different teams and different departments. What we're seeing though is that really organizations need to move away from the mindset of employees and customers and more think about what is the ultimate goal that needs to be achieved and how can customers be enabled to achieve that, and also employees enabled to help customers achieve that in many situations. So to summarize, we're going to be looking at how total experience can apply to the financial services industry, some of those challenges, how to pursue the TX approach, and a little bit on how Liferay will be able to help you on that journey. So to get started, provide a little bit of a definition around total experience. And total experience really combines both employees and customer experience to encompass every interaction with your financial organization. Instead of creating silos, we're looking at how these elements interact to build an interconnected universe around your business. What does that really mean, though, in like layman's terms or in the eyes of a customer? It's unlike, it would be unusual today for a customer to potentially do everything in a self-service capacity, just like it would be unrealistic to expect an employee to do everything on behalf of a customer. It's almost this hybrid world where we need to support customers and employees in these changing situations and mindsets that they find themselves in. So for example, you may have a customer who you're enabling through a self-service portal to take out a new insurance policy or to update their details. But sometimes they might run into trouble, or they just need some additional help and guidance, and they need to reach out or engage with an employee. Now, that could be through a variety of different channels, whether it's over the phone or through web chat type interfaces and chatbots. But essentially, that employee needs to be enabled to take up that experience from where that customer left off to ensure that it's seamless. Now, traditionally, when you've had this siloed approach where employees interact with one set of systems and customers interact with another, ensuring that seamless experience exists has been hard to come by. I think the other thing that really stands out is that total experience isn't enabled just by software or just by process. It's really enabled by all of these things, which Gartner have detailed in one of their technology trends for 2022. And that is design, development, automation, content, data, and analytic technologies. So if we think about that a little bit more, I'm sure if you reflect on your own professional career, you've been in a situation where a business or an organization where you've worked with has had a challenge, had a problem, and felt that implementing a new piece of software would magically solve it. They've gone and implemented that piece of software, and then 6, 12 months down the track, they've wondered why they haven't achieved the goals that they set out to do. And that's largely because of what Gartner's highlighting here. It's not a siloed approach even on the delivery of things. We need to give consideration to the user experience, how consumers or employees would interact with these tools and systems so that it's easy, so that it's personalized. And then when you think about things like data and analytics, how do we leverage these technologies to create a feedback loop so we can iterate quicker and make improvements on the fly so that we're not waiting months or even years before we change our approach, but we can do it in a much more dynamic fashion, ultimately driving better outcomes for both customers and employees. So I think, that then flows into the stat that we've got on the screen, which according to Gartner, 60% of large enterprises are looking to use total experience to transform their business models and achieve world-class customer and employee advocacy levels by 2026. Now, I know we're sitting in 2022, so 2026 does sound like a little bit time away, but that's going to go very rapidly, and organizations today need to start thinking about and implementing these changes if they're wanting to achieve those kind of outcomes over the next few years. Ultimately, in doing this, total experience helps focus and shape digital transformation efforts and provides for a better ROI, increased customer and employee satisfaction and retention, and also easier hiring and acquisition of staff, which in today's world is also becoming increasingly important. So we'll talk to some of the typical challenges that we see when it comes to total experience. And I think the largest one really is budget, and not in the traditional sense of whether an organization has money or doesn't have money. But if you think about total experience and the two kind of pillars that sit under that being customers and employees, it's typical that in many traditional organizations, the budgets for those solutions or the teams that look after that target group sit in different categories, right? So you may have a sales or a marketing or a customer success team who have the customer focused budget. And then you may have an employee advocacy or a HR team that traditionally looks after the budget for employee tools, systems, and the like. What we're saying with total experience, though, is that those two worlds start to come together or do come together. And if that's the case, we need to see organizations recognize this and work with their teams to understand that many of these capabilities and digital transformation initiatives need to be co-shared and basically budgeted for accordingly. The other big aspect, obviously, is technology. So traditionally, again, I think under that model, we've seen that there's often been a piecemeal approach. And sometimes organizations, when they've looked at a problem in a siloed manner, they will go and buy a piecemeal type solution that may be very good at solving one particular aspect of one particular problem, but it doesn't actually cater to the broader objectives of the organization. What that leads to is siloed data. So even if there are insights, they can only be used within one small tool or capability set, and don't allow for that to flow throughout the entire organization and be leveraged to create things like more personalized experiences, whether that's for employees or customers. Also, I think, one of the differentiators or different areas that needs to be considered quite strongly in financial services is the security aspect, especially if you're looking at developing a solution that allows both employees and customers to interact with or have some shared data that sits within that platform. So ensuring that there's a tool that has a strong governance layer that allows for the management and access to that data, the content, and the capabilities within the platform is also important. The third category that we've really seen, and again, I don't think would come as much surprise to anyone on the call, is the talent obstacles that we've been facing within, technology industry quite broadly, and obviously the global economy at large as well. We're in quite a unique situation where the economy as a whole isn't necessarily in its strongest position, but unemployment remains very, very low, and competition for roles such as developers, designers, product managers, solution architects is exceptionally strong. People in these roles and who have these capabilities really do have the choice of the types of roles and companies that they take on. And with the kind of lingering effects of COVID still with us, you've also seen things like, work from home policies and that work-life balance also coming into people's consideration of what types of roles that they want to take. So if organizations today aren't thinking about the total employee experience beyond just compensation, they can often find themselves shut out of the talent market or finding it very difficult to fill roles as well. So the good news, I think, is that these challenges, they are known. So there's not unknown challenges. And with the right approach, they can be overcome as well. It just requires a little bit of a mindset shift and a little bit of creative thinking in some situations. So I'll pass over to Rob now, who's going to share a little bit about experience and take over from me. So over to you, Rob.
Sure. Thank you, Paul. So yeah, experience, starting with experience. I often like to say that whether you think about experience or the experience that you're offering is a deliberate approach or not, people will have an experience anyway, whether you're directing it or not. So it's up to us to determine, okay, how do we want our brand or product or service to be perceived and experienced? Examples to influence that way of experiencing can, for example, be allowing your customers to access their financial accounts and information through just one convenient login, making payments in an easy way, just on the go, on a mobile phone, as we're all already used to. So it's those kind of conveniences that you, as a brand, can offer to your customers. More sophisticated processes like filling out loan forms, loan requests, or using self-service tools, chat options, checking knowledge bases to find answers to the questions that they have without the need to reach out to customer representatives. So kind of keeping the power with the customer themselves, making it easier for them. Updating their account information whenever it suits them, instead of being dependent on another product or service. From the employee side, it's convenient to be able to gather information about a customer that they're interacting with for providing personalized responses or advice. In that same vein, being able to view past interactions that a customer they're interacting with has had with the brand or service or product, so that repetition of information it won't happen. So don't tell any customer something they've already heard. Just help them along with their problem. So that kind of leads into being able to having access to the internal knowledge bases for the service to provide the troubleshooting and all of the support. More to an internal view, also think of being able to share the best practices with other employees within the same environment, so that any learnings that is taken from interactions with customers can be shared among them, and it will be able to improve your whole service representative ability. So basically, it is all of these things, and again, these are simple examples, but this is kind of the sum of all of these things that provides a total experience, so to speak. So how one interaction connects to and supports other interactions, that whole experience that you provide through these things is what your service or product will be known for. So going to the next slide, when we focus on experience, your digital transformation efforts with a TX approach, apologies. I'm having a small technical issue. Apologies for this. There we go. So yeah, so to be able to focus your digital transformation efforts with a total experience approach, you need to be ready to put the experience first, which means give up on them. We need the most recent technology just to have it. Tech for tech's sake. Forget that mentality and prioritize anything that leads to these better, more convenient, smoother, enjoyable experience for your customers and your employees. And if that means making small adjustments, if that is sufficient, fine, that's okay. If it does require a bigger tech investment, then so be it. So focusing on providing a good total experience helps you identify solutions with a mindset like this that will create value and simplicity rather than adding complexity and potentially reducing your return on investment. So the best way to empower experiences for both employees and your customers is focus on those actual people, so the actual people that are involved. So how do you connect the people with the experiences? How do you make sure they align? Well, starting this whole total experience journey, try and strip away your own definitions, predefined definitions of what is successful and what is unsuccessful. What do those represent? Instead, just go to the heart of your customer and the employee experiences to answer questions like, why is this experience necessary? Or this influence that we try to have on the experience that people have. So when interacting with our service or product, what does the user hope to gain from this interaction? How do they use a digital interface to achieve their goals? What would happen if this interaction that they have would fail or they cannot complete it? They end up with an error message or into a dead end. What then? How many steps do customers have to go through to complete a certain experience or task or flow, interaction, etc.? And how can you simplify this path, if at all? So there's a couple of key elements to figuring out how to make this experience as smooth and ideal and convenient as possible. So a number of elements I will be talking to in the coming slides are about trust, journey maps, user profiling, gathering user feedback and insights, and the total experience interactions that are part of those. All right, so first of all, trust. Establishing trust is a key part of ensuring a positive experience for users. It's not always easy to define exactly what affects trust or the amount of trust a user or customer or even an employee has with the software, because the level of trust they have is made up of a lot of different elements, especially when it comes to working with sensitive personal data like their finances, but also think about government portals or other financial applications. A high level of user trust is crucial for a product to function, but also to make sure that people will want to keep using the same product. Earning this trust is not necessarily just a one-off thing. So it's not like, during the very first interaction with your product, people are either deciding, okay, this is for me or this is not for me. It could be, but it can be more of a process over time. It's established as the user keeps interacting with your product throughout a session, throughout an interaction flow, or over multiple sessions. And this can take a minute, it can take days, it can take weeks. But however long it takes, it's influenced by considerations like, does your interface adhere to a user's intent at all times? For example, when I am planning to, let's say, fill out or request a loan, how easy for me is it to find that option? How easy do I get to start filling in what I expect to need to fill in? How easy do I get access to the conditions or the fine print? Is it even present, etc.? Is the user's input and the effort and the time that they take out to start to use your product, is that acknowledged? What I mean by that is once you start, for example, filling out a form, or you start making some calculations perhaps, is your progress saved? Is there clear feedback to the user that what they are doing is actually helping them progress the flow and bringing them closer to completion of their task? In another sense, the tone of voice that your product or service or app communicates to the user with, is it fitting with the context that they find themselves in? For example, again, if I'm still applying for that loan, I may or may not appreciate very informal language, unless it fits the brand and it fits in with my broader expectations already. So you can already see how this is a very context-specific consideration. Whenever there is an error, and these are not always, fully, you can't always prevent all of the errors 100% of the time, but how are those dealt with? How do you communicate to your user what happened and what they can do about it? But also what has happened with their input or search results so far? Again, linking back to the effort, is my effort that I already put into it, is it appreciated and acknowledged? Consistency of an interface. So how consistent is my experience from, let's say, the home screen all the way to filling out the forms and sending out my loan requests? If these two different sections of the application or service feel different, I may start doubting whether I am still making use of the same expected product or whether I'm still interacting with the same company. And maybe I'm not, but even if I'm not, or maybe I'm now in the portal of a third party, how is that communicated to me? Why am I in a different environment? So even if the interface isn't consistent, or we make use of different sources, how do we still make those different parts be part of a total experience that we're offering? And then lastly, the total experience, does it match the context and functionality that the user expects overall? So to keep talking about some of a total experience, kind of the sum of parts that make a total experience, it's really affected by lots of individual factors that can be considered. Because these points that I just went through, they are only examples. There are a lot of different potential factors that can influence it. Now, you can determine how to consider these by exploring and getting to understand your user's needs and backgrounds. And one way to start doing that is using journey maps. Journey maps help you understand what experiences, what a user experiences as they interact with your organization or product or service. And that in turn helps you understand their most important touch points, their motivations, their expectations, their pain points, and potential sources of confusion even, or points of error, etc. Now, once you have your customer and employee journey maps established, you can start comparing them and overlapping them to find out where they or how they support your intended total experience that you want to offer. For example, you'll be able to identify which step of the savings account setup process most often leads to a customer service call. And you could then simplify that step to support customers and free up time for employees. by allowing the self-service, for example. Right. So about connecting the people and the experiences and making it one. There's a number of different ways to really get to the bottom and understand your users, both from an employee and customer point of view. One of them is profiling your users, which helps you track and understand the different members of your organization's community, for example. It allows you to learn how needs differ across the various departments, how expectations might change when customers start doing more business with you, what each user's preferences are, and how this information helps unite experiences, again, in a total experience approach. Now, gathering user feedback helps you find out what is working and what is not at this moment. So by gathering this data and responding to those insights effectively, you can track your progress and work towards a united, seamless financial experience, and improve loyalty by showing your customers and employees that their voices are actually heard, that they're being listened to. Now, this helps you gain insight and see the experiences from a user's perspective, and it helps identify factors that you may have overlooked from your own personal perspective. So it helps you put yourself in the shoes of these end users and give you insight on how your current total experience is looking like, what it's looking like. So for example, one extra step that you may not have realized that employees have to take in a certain process, or part of your system that leaves customers feeling confused, these are very handy ways to find out those tiny points of friction. So to be able to offer your total experience in the in the broadest sense, you should also consider going beyond what you're currently offering or the current use channels. So because user interactions, either from a customer perspective or an employee perspective, they come in a lot of different forms. And your system shouldn't necessarily be limited to only one kind of input channel, like interaction channel, and thus the data. So your organization should or could potentially support interactions that come through to voice interaction, but also consider, if we're talking a mobile app, making use of gestures, swiping from outside of the screen into the screen, using multiple fingers, specific touch patterns, etc. Consider including a chat, whether that's a chat bot or connected to a live customer support department, using text to text messages, etc. But let's not forget, even though we're talking technology and digital, let's not forget actual in-person interactions and branch visits. Do people have the option to actually come and visit you in your local branch, if this is applicable? So with all these considerations, this will help you expand your total experience, kind of to help encompass different technologies and communication solutions, as well as catering to different types of users. I'll be handing it over back to you, Paul.
Thanks, Rob. I appreciate that. And interestingly, I think one of the things that really stuck out from what you were saying, and kind of does dovetail into what I'll be talking about next, is that people, whether they're customers or employees, are going to have an experience whether you plan for it or not, right? Like just by virtue of the fact that someone's interacting with a product or service, you have that experience. One of the other things that really stood out was you talked about thinking about the error states or the failure states. And it's quite interesting because literally this past week, I've had a situation with one of the big four banks, actually, long-time customer, and only probably 2 months ago, 3 months ago, I praised their service, right? I wanted to create a new account. I logged on, very seamless, press a few buttons, enter a few details. 2 minutes later, I've got a brand new account. I needed to do that same experience again just the other day. So my expectations were set quite high. Answer the first few questions, error. Nondescript, just error. You've encountered an error, which is great. So then, okay, I'll leave it, refresh, try again, error. Okay, leave it another day, go back, still getting the error message, right? So now, because there was no consideration given to that, there was no prompt to, hey, do you want to call someone? Do you want someone to call you? I've now had a negative experience multiple times, and it's at the point where, hey, maybe I do now go and just open an account online somewhere else because I don't want personally to go into a branch. I think the other thing that kind of ties into it, though, is when you think about that total experience piece, right? They might have viewed my experience just through the lens of Paul being a customer. But if they thought about it more holistically, maybe if their system said, hang on, this person's tried to go through this form process 3 or 4 times in a short window of time, why are their employees not being provided with that information to say, maybe it's worth giving Paul a call and seeing how we can help you? And I know in this instance, right, it's a low value product, right? Like banks don't necessarily make a huge amount of money on transaction accounts. But again, if you elevate that conversation and go, well, now if I have a bad experience today on that, maybe down the track, I don't think about using them for a car loan or a home loan or something else that gives them a higher margin revenue. So I think that, yeah, that really stood out to me, and it kind of goes into what I was talking about next and connecting with your customers. And really the first point was that customers come to your organization with a set of expectations. And in my case, those expectations were built on past experience, but they don't necessarily have to be. They can be based on experience with other service providers, whether they're insurance companies, banks, or even completely different, right? Like if I have a very positive experience, this would be highly unusual, but liaising with my telco or an energy company, right? That bar has now been lifted. And I'm like, well, if it's easy enough for that telco to solve my problem or to help me in this way, I now expect the same level of ease of use with a bank or an insurance company. So yeah, I really think that there's 2 lenses of thinking through making sure you meet expectations. Technology obviously forms part of that, as we can also see on the screen, things like accessibility. So, not everyone can read or, read text off the screen, or they might not be able to comprehend as much as other people because their English isn't their first language. How do I support people at different stages? You don't want to be too intrusive and like ping me constantly being like, hey, do you want to open this account? But equally, you need to be able to recognize when I am struggling. And then that service offering piece also comes into it, I think, because whether you offer a full stack of services, like many financial organizations do, or you're very narrow in your focus, at the end of the day, I just want clarity on what you do offer. And if you do offer something I'm interested in, how do I then get what it is that I'm after? Building on that, I think that's really the bread and butter, the meeting expectations these days. But more often than not, we're seeing personalization really come to the forefront. Not only is this, from the lens of how do we encourage or prompt people to take actions that we want them to take. So, for example, Paul's been looking at credit cards on our website. Next time he comes, maybe we prompt him that way. But also ensuring that even if it's not a transactional related thing, how do we ensure that I get the information that I'm after in a really easy to use manner? So maybe they know that, hey, Paul's got a large number of savings accounts. He's obviously someone who's very conscious about his overall financial health. Let's make sure that that account health or his financial summary is front and center, very present in the interface for him. Let's understand how Paul prefers to interact with our business. So I already mentioned before, like I personally don't want to go into a branch. Is it via a chatbot? Or maybe there's an option like it's a click to call. All these things, I think, have been given consideration, and a lot of people talk about them, but then they don't kind of follow through with that mindset of tying these experiences all together. It's all well and good to have a chatbot, but then if an employee, for example, can't see how I've interacted with that chatbot, if I do have to get on a phone call with them, then I'm repeating myself. I'm doubling up. I'm answering questions I've already done. And again, that detracts from the overall experience that I have. And then the third pillar here is really self-service. It's bread and butter for a lot of organizations these days to offer things like, be able to change your address details and update your policies. But if we're talking about insurance or check account balances, home loan rates, these kind of things, But what I'd really encourage organizations to do is think about, how do you offer a differentiated self-service experience so you can begin to compete again and have a point of difference? So I know Rob and I offline have spoken about an insurance use case where, let's just say I have an accident in my car. How good would it be for me to be able to get out of my car and take a photo and automatically send that to the insurance company, or be prompted in that experience to say, hey, first of all, is everyone okay? If not, let's get emergency services there. But if everyone is okay, let's make sure you get all of the details that you need, so that when you call us up and we say, hey, do you have the license number of the person who crashed into you? You're not like, oh, I forgot to get that. So again, like, that's an example where I think traditionally it might have been viewed as a siloed approach. Like, that is a customer-centric starting point for that interaction. But it does now then touch on that employee experience as well, because if I am someone who's sitting in a call center and that insurance claim has come through, and I have to say to that person, hey, you didn't get the contact details of the person who crashed into you. Now we've created like this negative friction or this negative relationship, and we're just making that employee's job harder. So yeah, look, I think that there's a lot of situations that might not be immediately obvious where that employee and customer kind of experience do overlap. Moving on to the next slide, there is the view of connecting directly to employees. So we've kind of got the company to customer relationship, we've got the employee relationship now as well. And not only, I think, it's the bread and butter of this is like, again, those expectations have risen. People are used to working with apps in their personal life that are seamless and easy to use. So they now expect the same when they come to work. But there's a lot of benefit that can be gained from thinking about these things in this holistic manner. We've talked about the talent shortage, right? And I think one of the big things that some companies are getting right with their flexible policies for work from home and recognizing that work-life balance is that culture and community are important, not only to the employee, and it's not just about giving them perks, but it's about how do we create an environment where that employee wants to stay, because if they do leave, they're going to be very hard to replace. And while a lot of the things around like compensation, work from home balance go into that, so too does the experience that they have with their job. If you're sitting in an office environment or working from home and you've got to help solve customer issues or, pick up the phone and talk to customers, and you're constantly frustrated by the tools and systems that you have to work with in your day-to-day life, that's not creating this positive experience for employees. Building on that, right, how do we help employees come together to solve common issues? But I think more importantly than that, that knowledge that's often in people's heads and doesn't get shared or doesn't get noted down, often it's not because people don't want to share that information and that knowledge that they've acquired. It's just that there's no process for doing it. Or the process that does exist to do it is hard and cumbersome. Or they might have part of the solution, but they don't have the whole solution. They don't know who in the organization to reach out to help them. So, historically, a lot of these things have been solved by like the quote unquote intranet. But I really feel that, they're static representations of the past, whereas the future is more about employee experience portals and creating environments that are, view that person as the totality of what they do for your organization, not just necessarily their specific job function and the fact that, hey, they need to read a news update from your CEO. So I think building onto that, connecting employees to the organization, I've touched on a few of these things, but it's about fast and efficient access to the systems and information, but more importantly, the systems and information that's relevant to them. So again, personalization really shines through, not only from a security perspective, right, in financial services, making sure they can only see what they want, but also from just giving them the information that's relevant to them. So say, for example, I'm someone who works in a bank branch. My requirements are going to be completely different to the person who's the head of marketing for, Australia, who sits in the corporate office, right? Whether that's just, hey, I'm just a branch employee. Maybe when I log in, I'm more interested in understanding what my leave balance is, how I request leave, when the next pay's made, that kind of thing. Whereas if I'm sitting in that corporate office, maybe I do care more about like, what's the CEO's vision document for 2023. And the final point to raise here is really about that real-time information. Again, kind of contrasting that to the static intranets of old. If you've got content on the, the homepage of your employee portal or intranet and it's more than a week or two old, it's largely irrelevant. And if people keep seeing that, again, it's a negative experience, and it creates this pattern of behavior where it's like, well, why do I need to go there? Because every time I go there, the information's kind of like old and I've seen it a dozen times. So I think they're things that are important to consider as well. Finally, as we move on, right, there's then connecting employees to customers. And this really gets to the heart and soul of that total experience that we've been talking about throughout the webinar today. Often a journey can start with the customer, or it might start with the employee, but it can go back and forth depending on the complexity or how that customer is interacting with you. So how do you ensure that both parties in this situation have access to the same information, understand the preferences of that customer? So if they do get halfway through an online form and do need to pick up the phone or engage with some chat, via a chatbot, that we're just picking up from where they left off. Communication these days, I think one of the interesting things that's really come out of this is that, probably if you go back, 5 or so years, people are like, hey, let's just push it all to self-service. And that means that we as an organization can cut down on the number of call center staff. And hey, we need to reduce the number of calls that we receive in our call center. There's actually a chat I had with someone who works in insurance, and that was the mindset that they had. But then they shifted it as they thought about it more, and they said, no, we still want customers to call us. The only difference is we want them to call us when we can add value to the relationship, where there's something that we can do via voice or face-to-face that can't be done online. So I think, when you think about communication channels across multiple touch points, it's not to say like picking up the phone's old school. It's like, no, it has its place and time, but it has to be relevant and it has to be at the right place and time. If I can do it online or via chatbot, that might be better for many people. And then data visibility, right? If we are capturing data, making sure we're informing customers of that process, making sure they understand what data we have access to. I think, it's not necessarily hit as strongly in Australia, but it is going to continue to come to the forefront. And all of these things really flow into the bottom set of points there, which is around personalization. So not only personalizing the front end interface, but personalizing the kind of workflow of tasks that need to be done. For example, if we already have a customer who's banked with us for a long time, has had multiple, loans with us in the past, and they engage with us, is there part of that process that we don't need to go through? Like, we already have their details. We can, personalize that process to get to an answer in a quicker, quicker amount of time. So I'll pass back to Rob now to talk a little bit about the benefits of that total experience approach.
Sure thing, thanks. So yes, to benefit from taking a total experience approach, first of all, it has value for everyone involved, for you, your customers, your employees. And as Paul just touched upon a little bit just now, personalization is a big part of it, right? A total experience approach makes it easier to personalize your interactions with your employee customer, with your customers, with your employees. So for example, an employee who has access to a customer's profile and their preferences can then structure their conversations that they have with this specific customer in a more helpful way and engage with them on a deeper level. So also think of seamlessness. Don't neglect your customers or your employees in favor of the other. Instead, consider them to be part of the same puzzle, basically, and improve both of their environments simultaneously to create a seamless experience that remains consistent across the different channels and the different touch points. And also touched on earlier as well, engagement. Focusing on total experience, you enable richer and more engaging experiences. So your customers and your employees will both spend more time interacting with the technology and strengthening their relationship with each other, your organization, instead of struggle to find the right information in the right place or within an acceptable time, or troubleshooting with your software, etc. So also on satisfaction, customers and employees, when they're on the same page, each group becomes more satisfied with their experience, with the experience they're having with your brand or product. They feel seen, heard, acknowledged, appreciated by your organization, and that can keep them engaged with you, and it has to make it a more like a longer term relationship. Also, security. It's easier to manage your security, let's say in a financial environment, when you're taking a total experience approach. That's because you have a single unified solution instead of piecemeal solutions here and there, different environments, different systems that each come with their own vulnerabilities and specific requirements. And then the return on your investment with a total experience approach, you won't have to choose employee and customer solutions separately. Instead, you can just invest in one single course of action that improves both at the same time, reducing your tech investment, improving your return on investment. Back to you, Paul.
Thanks, Rob. So look, I think we've covered a fair bit of ground around total experience and the different aspects of it. And now just take a few minutes to kind of share Liferay's lens through this and how we work with organizations that are already thinking in this mindset and adopting a total experience approach. And there's certain capabilities that exist and the way that we think about the market that kind of lend itself to this. And one of the things of Liferay is that it does exist to unify existing solutions and bring them together in a cohesive central environment. So what I mean by that is, if I think about one of our largest customers in region, they use us for an employee experience portal. And behind the scenes, there's 35 different tools that employee needs to interact with. Now, I know in today's world with single sign-on, people can jump in between these different tools fairly easily without needing to log in and out, but it still is then a different experience. They're taken out of one workflow and pushed into another one. And what often happens is there's so many tools that employees end up defaulting to using the 2 or 3 that they need to most recently, and everything else gets forgotten about unless it's some urgent issue that pops up. With something like Liferay, you can create this unified employee experience. So I always interact with one environment. It's common to me. I understand it. I'm used to interacting with it. It's personalized to me. But behind the scenes, maybe when I do go to log a leave balance, it is still pushing it into another third-party system that's a best-of-breed technology there. So when we look at our customers who are using Liferay to the best of its advantage, they're doing it through that mindset. How do I create a consistent experience that unifies all of the different systems that sit behind the scenes, whether it's for customers or employees? Moving on to the next slide, being adaptable, right? We spoke at the very start of this presentation around competing on experience. While that is very, very true, the other aspect to that is experience isn't stagnant. Someone might create a new product and that product lasts for many years without necessarily too many updates, but experience is constantly evolving, constantly changing, whether that's because of how your customers or employees are interacting with that, or just because of the competitive nature, right? If anything, we saw through COVID how quickly organizations needed to change and adapt. And the ones that were able to adapt quickly had in place capabilities where they could empower non-IT staff to do things like create new pages, create forms, update, a workflow process without necessarily needing to engage IT. And it's all about being able to make these iterative changes more quickly so you can remain competitive and, take market share from your competitors. If you think about it, if it takes you, let's just say, you've got a customer experience process, and previously, if you needed to make a change, you need to, book that in with IT, wait for them to do it, and that's a 4 or 6 week turnaround. If you can do that instead directly within your team in a matter of days, how many more iterations can you do of that experience to get to the best end state possible in, a year? Many, many more times. And that's where we're seeing organizations understand the importance of adaptability. Next kind of aspect to this is you need to support customers and employees in the ways that work for them. So we've spoken very heavily about personalization, and that really is the foundation of it. But even at a broader level than that, right? We're interacting with this content and these services in many different devices in many different ways. Even your employees are interacting differently. For example, you know, an employee who maybe works in a branch type environment, or perhaps even isn't directly a financial services type staff member. Maybe they provide a support function within your office. They're part of the catering team or the cleaning team. They might only ever interact via a mobile device because there's no need for them to sit in front of a computer. Whereas someone who maybe sits in IT or a developer, they might have multiple monitors. So again, things like screen real estate, what they can see on the screen, how easy it is to interact and find the content. It's not a one-size-fits-all module. And applications like Liferay have the capability out of the box to change that experience and ensure that it is relevant for the user, all the way down to an individual user, but also at a broad, you know, user group level as well, if that's a preferred approach. And in addition to that, connecting, right? If we move to the next slide, connect people more easily with the people who matter. So I touched on this a little bit around the employee side of things. There's all this knowledge, all this IP that exists within the heads of many of the staff that your organizations employ. Often it's not documented. Often they don't know where to find it. And while, you know, we're also working more remotely, how do you create this environment where it's easy to find those people, easy to interact with those people, easy for those people to share that knowledge that they've created? Same things for, you know, on the customer side of things, whether it's communicating to employees or even just being able to access simple information that's relevant to them within that one environment. Again, that source of that information could come from a myriad of different systems, but I, as a customer, don't want to log into a different, you know, portal experience to get my credit card balance, as opposed to seeing my savings account. It all needs to come together. And that's all about these kind of connected experiences, you know, and make it a more seamless overall experience, really. So that kind of brings us to the end of the webinar. We will have that Q&A open while I just sum up here. But I hope today, if anything, you take away a few key, you know, items in your mind. And that is really that total experience is a growing trend within financial services and more broadly for that matter. Total experience, it should not be looked at in this siloed approach of customers or employees, or even customers, employees, and partners. You know, it really needs to be an all-encompassing type consideration of how these different people and groups are interacting with your brand, its services, etc. As Rob spoke to, it must start with experience. You know, it's all well and good to have the technology or the process documented, but if the experience is poor, technology won't save you. We've spoken about the connectedness, bringing people together. And I think, you know, really at the end, if you look at it in this holistic view, total experience does have a lot of benefits that it can bring, even if maybe on the outset, the project scope looks bigger. When you actually think about it and do it in this holistic manner, if you can drive improved satisfaction, if you can have higher engagement, if you can do more things from one central platform or from a reduced number of platforms, you've got the ROI benefit. There's just so many things that can come together. And to share a little bit more about Liferay, we've spoken about some of the capabilities there, but really our customers, both here in Australia and across the globe, do turn to us for solutions like self-service client portals, advisor portals, digital workspaces, integration platforms, wealth management solutions. There's plenty of things that we do in this space across the board. So look, I just had a quick check on the Q&A. It looks like we're going to wrap up here. Now we're almost at the top of the hour. So once again, thank you for those who've joined us. I hope you found it an informative session. Thank you also to Rob for sharing your knowledge and your insight. It's been great doing this talk with you.
Thanks, Paul. Same.
Thanks again, everyone. If you do want more information, sorry, I almost forgot, there will be an email that comes out following this event with a copy of the recording. It will have our contact details there as well, so don't hesitate to reach out. We'd be happy to share more insight, not just about Liferay, but about our viewpoint on total experience for the customer and employee as well. Thanks once again.